Hi, I'm Michael Klinkner, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I've been working with kids and teens for over 25 years. I'm going to talk to you today about mental health issues in kids and teens in our schools, specifically around anxiety and depression, because those are the two most common mental health issues that our kids and teens experience these days. I'm going to start off with for depression. Let's talk about some statistics and so you can know how common it is with the kids that we work with. So about 20% of all teens and kids experience depression before they reach adulthood. That's one in five. That's a really high number. And between 10 and 15% suffer depression symptoms at any given time. And about 30% of teens that have depression or symptoms of depression or never get treated for it. And so, of all of those kids that are suffering from depression and depression symptoms, a lot of them aren't getting any services, and a lot of kids are showing those signs at any given moment. Here are some of the risk factors to look for kids with depression. So, female teens are about twice as likely as boys are. The number is also true for elementary school kids, although it drops slightly, but it's still close to about 2 to 1. Abused and neglected kids are most at risk, and adolescents who suffer from chronic illness or other physical ailments are also that's a really high risk factor for depression. Here's why. Chronic pain and chronic illness have an ongoing effect on the brain that literally can help create depression. It becomes a dopamine issue, which is one of the chemicals in the brain that helps you feel better. It's like when you like something or something is good to you, dopamine gets created in the brain. It's a reward system. What happens is whenever there's a chronic illness or chronic pain, you systematically and over time have just less dopamine going into your brain, which ultimately can help create depression. In teens with a history of depression or mental illness, they're going to be much more likely to have ongoing problems throughout their life. Teens with substance abuse problems, this includes vaping, this includes nicotine. And so kids that are vaping, we see a lot of marijuana use these days. There's an increase in psilocybin or mushrooms that's happening a lot. Also, depending on different areas of the state or different areas of a city, things like methamphetamine or cocaine are also much more prevalent than they have been in previous years. So even kids that are experimenting with those things, or the kids that are becoming that are using them to help cope, have a much higher rate of depression than the average teen. Also, when there's been trauma in kids or teens' life, they're much more likely for depression. Now, trauma can have a lot of different definitions, including divorce. Depending on how the kid responds and how the parents are doing overall through that divorce, lots of kids can be resilient, but for some kids, especially if it's a contentious divorce, we'll see that that's going to register as a trauma. Also, things like abuse or neglect, or whenever something like big and scary happens, like a car wreck or the death of a loved one, can register as a trauma. If that occurs in a kid's or teen's life, they're going to be much more likely to have depression. The signs to look for in a kid or teen if they're having depressive issues, they're going to have a big sensitivity to rejection or failure. We're going to see lots of feelings of guilt and shame, and then low self-esteem. We're going to see an increase in reporting of things like physical illness, headaches, stomach aches. They're going to be going to the nurse a whole lot more. Now, this one's important because what happens is they are actually having headaches. They are actually having stomach aches. There's no physical problem wrong with them. If they go to the doctor's not going to be able to diagnose something that's going on that's causing those. What's happening is their body is responding to the ongoing depression. And so they are experiencing those things, but it's not without a direct physical diagnosable cause. The kid is just really suffering and having a really hard time. We're going to see a lot of absences from school, lots of school refusal, like they don't want to go, because it's really hard to just get out of bed in the morning. They don't want to go. And then poor performance at school. We're going to see threats or even attempts to run away from home, and then changes in eating or sleeping patterns. And that's going to show up in the classroom as the kid is going to see much more drained. They may sleep through class when previously they hadn't. Also, if they're having trouble at sleeping at night, especially in the early morning classes, They're not going to be participating. They're going to put their head down. They're not going to be present like they used to be. They're also going to be sad or irritable and complain about how they don't like anything that they used to like before. Irritability, especially in males, is a really common sign of depression that often gets ignored. They won't necessarily see like blue or down or sad or even dramatic. They're going to act out more. They're going to be much more likely to cause problems, to talk back, to push back against rules or rule makers, things like that. Also, they're going to become potentially much more likely to take it out on their peers in the form of bullying. What happens there is, because they're having trouble at home, or for whatever the reasons are behind their depression, males especially are going to tend to seek to make themselves feel better, or seek control in the form of getting the power and control from other people. Now, don't get me wrong. Girls and young women can absolutely do this too. It's going to be much more likely and common in males, and you're going to see it much more in the schools through males. Teenage girls, young girls in elementary school age or even middle school age, they're more likely to participate in things like cyberbullying, online bullying, bullying through social media. Boys are more likely to have the physical forms of it or to do it in a school setting. Also, we're going to see if there's some depression going on with a student, that they're going to be more socially withdrawn and their grades are going to be dropping, or we're going to see that assignments aren't getting turned in where they used to be. Their efforts towards assignments isn't going to be there. It's going to just appear like they don't care. Let's talk about anxiety. About 35% of adolescents have a diagnosable anxiety disorder. That's a lot. That's over 1 in 3 of any kid in a school setting has a diagnosable anxiety disorder. And some of those, almost of those 30% of the group of kids that has a diagnosable anxiety disorder, about 8% of them have severe anxiety. We'll talk about what severe anxiety looks like. And the prevalence of an anxiety disorder among students is higher for females than it is for males. The risk factors for anxiety are having issues that negatively impact their self-esteem, like obesity, peer problems, being bullied, family issues, and then having academic problems can help cause anxiety. What happens there is, if a kid has trouble with comprehension, or they have executive functioning issues, or even there's a lot of comorbidity or like crossover between ADHD and anxiety. The anxiety comes from because everything feels so hard to do all the time. And so a student may be trying really hard, but no matter what they do or how hard they tried, no matter how much tutoring they get, their brain just doesn't get it. And as a result, they're going to start to think that they're stupid, they can't do things, school isn't for them. And they may be getting pressure for high grades in classes or subjects where they just can't perform. Also, a risk factor for anxiety in students is going to be if they've been a victim or witness of violence, such as physical abuse or sexual abuse. This one can get tricky because typically we're going to think that a student has to have been abused themselves in order for anxiety disorder to happen. That isn't true. If they hear lots of arguing from their parents, or they're aware of it, or even potentially if a parent is reporting to them about what's happening when they're not around, that can cause anxiety in a student because they end up so worried about what's going to happen in the home, what their home lacks predictability and safety. And if your home lacks predictability and safety, then they're going to have general anxiety about the world's predictability and anxiety. And so like a teacher or administrator or like anybody within a school can be really safe and kind and nurturing. But if when that student goes home and home isn't safe because the people that are supposed to protect them are mom and dad, if mom and dad aren't safe and mom and dad aren't going to protect them, they're going to have a general distrust of adults overall. If again, just like depression, if a student is using vapes or marijuana or alcohol or any other of the drugs, that's going to potentially have an increase in anxiety. What happens there is, because say I have anxiety, and I learned to numb it through vaping in the bathroom between classes, or the way I deal with things is to get high between classes, things like that. Well, now I don't develop the coping skills that I could have myself in order to deal with my ongoing anxiety. My coping skill becomes the drug. The problems, the underlying reasons for the anxiety don't get dealt with. And so the anxiety just gets worse and worse. And then I numb it and numb it. And I can't deal with anything. I don't learn how to take care of my own problems. I just learn to numb my own problems. And then there becomes a snowball effect where the anxiety gets worse and worse because I think I can't deal with it. I turn to vaping or marijuana or alcohol in order to make myself feel better about those things. But the things aren't getting better and everything just gets worse and worse over time. Also, if someone is a sexual or a gender minority, if they're on the LGBTQ plus, those teens, kids, students overall tend to have more anxiety. Even if it's a generally accepting environment, lots of times there's so much stuff that still goes on online about comments that can happen. They'll overhear things, or if they're from a non-accepting home that thinks it's a phase or that's something that eventually they'll just like quote unquote get over. Those tend to create anxiety issues for teens, kids or teens or students that are LGBTQ plus. Here are the signs to look for in students as far as anxiety issues. We're going to see a lot of nervousness, a lot of worries, or a lot of fear. So that's going to show up most easily on test day, where a student is going to come in, they're going to be very fidgety, they may be biting their fingernails, their foot is going a million miles an hour, they're going to look tense, they may have like a clenched up jaw, or their shoulders are going to be up in their ears, things like that. And so some of that is typical, of course. When there's a test, lots of times there's just nervousness. We're talking about anxiety, not just nervousness, because then what happens is on test day, when we have all that the fidgetiness or the other problems, is then we're going to get a freeze response from that student, and they're going to get overwhelmed, and they may know the knowledge, they may have the information in there, but they're getting so worked up about the test, they can't do it. There isn't any way for the information to come out or come out as well as it could if they were more relaxed. Other signs of anxiety is going to be lots of worries about school performance, about making sure, or they may be talking to teachers or administrators about their grades, trying to get breaks or unassigned extra credit just to try to make sure their grades are high. Usually that's a good indicator of there's lots of pressure at home about grades, about performance, and they're getting strong messages about that they're not good enough based on what their school performance is. Also, other signs of anxiety are going to be social isolation. They're just by themselves a lot. They may have trouble making friends. Again, this is going to be a reflection of self-esteem. They may think that no one wants to be their friend, that they're not good enough to have friends, that no one's going to understand them, things like that. And then the more they isolate, the more of a self-fulfilling prophecy that becomes, because when they're not trying to make friends or not trying to be social, and they're not talking to their peers, it reinforces the idea that no one wants to talk to them, which just again further exacerbates that problem. You may see that in the classroom in the form of whenever there's a group project, or if they can pair up with somebody to do a project or an assignment, they're going to choose not to do that. Again, it's going to be because they think that no one's going to be with them. We're also going to see potentially panic attacks. A panic attack is going to happen whenever a student cannot breathe, they may be crying, they may get sweaty, they just can't control their body in response to fear that seems completely unmanageable in a moment. Also, a sign of anxiety is perfectionistic tendencies. So let's talk for a second about what perfectionism is. So perfectionism comes in a couple of different forms. One is going to be they have to do everything absolutely perfectly. So this may be a student that on drawing or a writing assignment is going to erase things over and over and over again until they get it exactly how they think it should be. Or they may rewrite a paper multiple times. They may turn something in, but then want to turn it again because they think they did a better job. They'll take very, very long to get assignments done that could be done in a shorter period of time. Another side of perfectionism is they think they can't do it perfectly, so they don't even attempt it. And so if they think there's an assignment or a test or a project, something like that they're not going to be able to do up to their perfect standards, they'll just avoid doing it. They'll put it off to the last second. It'll look like procrastination, but what's happening is they feel like they can't do it, so they don't do it. The underlying idea there is a little bit complicated, because what can happen for those type of students with this perfectionism is, if I try it and fail, that is intolerable. I cannot allow that to happen. But if I don't try, then I didn't fail. And I can just say, like, well, I didn't do it, so I didn't fail. So that is more tolerable to them than trying and failing. So they'll avoid things that potentially they could do. But if they think they can't do it perfectly, they're not going to do it. So they may avoid assignments. They may avoid tests. They may not do things, just completely under the idea of, well, I didn't try, so no one can say that I failed. We're going to see a lot of apprehension. And so were things where there's a presentation for the class, or they have to go up to the board to do something. Of course, it's very natural for students to be nervous about those things. Public speaking is hard for a lot of people. We're talking about an apprehension that is much more than that, where it's going to be a lot of like potentially uncontrollable shaking, issues with being able to enunciate. Sometimes they'll speak very, very softly. Those are also students where their anxiety is going to show up if you call on them in class unprovoked. They didn't raise their hand. You're just calling on them. And so lots of times where students have like all the kids' names on popsicle sticks or like something like that in the front of the class, and like teachers just randomly pulling names in order for participation during the class. Students with anxiety issues, when you call on them, sometimes they'll just refuse. They'll quickly say, I don't know, even if they do know. They won't allow themselves to be embarrassed like that. And so they're going to just bail in the situation, instead of like the fear of getting something wrong or someone making fun of them for doing something they wish they wouldn't. Also, students with anxiety issues are just going to feel so stressed and so tense all the time. Like nothing is ever okay. Everything is something to be nervous about. Those are the students that feel really, really tightly wound all the time about everything. Also, those students are going to have racing thoughts. Also, they may have rapid speech because their brain is going so fast. Then what they're trying to say, they have to try to keep up with. That can also be a sign of anxiety. Now, this next one, a sign of anxiety, this is a tricky one. Trouble concentrating. What happens is, for students with an anxiety issue, their bandwidth is completely taken up by trying to figure out if their environment is safe enough or not. So they're paying attention to lots of things. Those are students who are going to know like where everything is in the classroom, about like what teachers drive which cars. They're going to completely know the exact schedule, what's supposed to happen when. They're completely attentive to like where everybody sits and what goes on and like where things are. They're constantly sorting the people in their overall environment for safety. That's what they're paying attention to. What they're not paying attention to is the whiteboard at the front of the room, or the presentation that's being shown, or whatever's going on in the front of the classrooms. They're not paying attention to what you want them to pay attention to. They're paying attention to everything else. And that's not the same as ADHD. ADHD has a different set of symptoms. There's some overlap, but ADHD is going to be where, they're less fidgety. They have to get up and move around, or like they can't pay attention to really kind of anything unless it's very, very stimulating. For someone with an anxiety disorder, it doesn't matter how stimulating the thing is that they're doing. And so they could even be potentially playing a video game or something like that, or watching their favorite show or movie. And there's still going to be lots of like just paying attention to their environment because they're trying to figure out that they're safe. And so again, ADHD issues are going to be, maybe they can pay attention for short bursts, 10 to 15 minutes. That may not exist with someone with a student with an anxiety issue. They may not be able to make it that long because they're going to be constantly looking around, not because they're inattentive. It's because it's all about their environment and they're trying to just make sure that something scary isn't about to happen to them. Also, students with an anxiety issue are going to be constantly so nervous or worried about criticism, about being told that they're going to do something wrong. Also, a sign of anxiety, just like with depression, but for different reasons, there's going to be school refusal where they just don't want to get up and go. They're worried about what's going to happen, about what's going to go on, and anything that's going to be unpredictable to them is going to feel completely unsafe. Physical signs that can show up in a student if they have an anxiety issue are going to be like a racing heart. They may talk about tightness in their chest. They may be cold all the time, lots of headaches and stomach aches. Again, there's not going to be necessarily a general practitioner doctor isn't going to be able to diagnose something that's going on there. They're going to be so tense all the time. We'll see a lot of headaches with kids with anxiety issues because they're so tense up all the time that they get so much muscle tension that it's going to make their head hurt because like their neck is so tight all the time, their shoulders are so tight all the time, or even they're clenching their jaw so often that we're going to see a lot of headaches that way. And then we'll see a lot of stomach aches because one of the things that we do in response to anxiety is an acid gets released into your stomach. And so a student can wake up in the morning with a stomach ache based on the fear of what's going to happen later in the day. We can see lots of tenseness, sore muscles, lots of like shaking or like inability to like calm down their hands, lots of fidgetiness. Also, they may report trouble breathing. Again, it's going to be because their heart's going so fast all the time. They're having a difficult time for their breathing to be able to keep up and to oxygenate their blood. And it's because they're in a rapid heart rate all the time based on that anxiety or fear. They're also going to report they feel tired or weak a lot of the time. Again, that's because they're so worried and they're so tense that their muscles are tense a lot of the time. And then their system is just going to be so worn down based on the ongoing anxiety that is existing in a typical school day. School is 6, 7, 8 hours. And if they're nervous for that period of time, you are dead by the end of that. And it happens 5 days a week over a period of time. Anyone's body is going to be pretty shut down. And we're going to feel pretty tired a lot of the time. The tough part of that is, though, if it's an anxiety issue, they're going to also have difficulty sleeping. So they're going to feel tired and weak, but they're never going to get enough rest day in and day out. With teens with depression and with anxiety, we can see a lot of one of the big concerning things that can happen is suicidality or suicide thoughts. And so we're going to see a lot of overlap in teens with depression and anxiety. You may have picked that up as far as the signs and what to look for in a student in what looks like depression or what looks like anxiety. But a lot of the symptoms are the same. Also, a lot of the thoughts and self-esteem issues are very similar between the two. Also, when there's anxiety and there's depression and there's self-esteem issues and there's school performance issues, and then there's social isolation and lots of and potentially troubles at home or even trauma in the home. That's the recipe that can potentially lead to suicidal thoughts, attempts, or even completion of suicide. I'm going to transition now into like suicidality and what to look for, and then potentially as a teacher or an administrator, what can be done about that. So let me give you some recent statistics on suicidal for students. Of those students who had attempted suicide, about 62% of them had made a suicidal statement before they attempted suicide. About 45% of them had consumed alcohol within 12 hours of attempting. Now, that's a big deal because they're going to tend to be more disinhibited, obviously, when there's the presence of alcohol. And then 76% of students that had attempted suicide had shown a decline in their academic achievements and academic performance in the past year. And so that's going to be within a school year, that's going to be a sort of a steep decline we're going to see in their academic performance. So those may be students who had previously been doing well or passing grades, and now we're watching their grades drop, and they just continue to drop. That's an easy sign to look for when you take a student's current performance versus their past performance, and then you add that together with some of the other signs we're going to talk about here. There are about lots of times, teens especially will attempt suicide multiple times before they complete. It has a lot to do with access to lethal means, especially in the home. Girls are more likely to attempt suicide. Boys are more likely to complete suicide. Again, it's because of how they choose to attempt suicide. Boys are more likely to attempt using a gun. And using a gun, obviously, is going to have a higher percentage of suicide completion. Here are some of the signs that a teacher or an administrator can look for in a student. If they're saying things like they feel like a burden to others, that people are going to be better off without them. This is one of the key things I look for students that I'm treating for anxiety or depression. Because what happens is, so what we typically think is, we would like potentially say to a student if they're saying like, I'm a burden to others, I'm not good enough, things like that. We're gonna tend to say things like, no, you're not. You are so loved. You have so many people that care about you. How that computes in the brain of a suicidal teen is, yeah, lots of people love me, and I'm terrible, and I'm not good enough, and no one likes me. Therefore, everyone would be better off if I were dead. If I weren't around, all these people who love me, their lives will get better. Now, that's a little bit complicated, and it's not intuitive. But what happens for the teen is they're doing an equation of, look how much I'm cared for, potentially, and look what a burden I am, or look how not good enough I am. How much better would my mom's life be, or how much better would my dad or siblings' life be if they didn't have to deal with me all of the time? And so my grades are getting worse. I'm having so much trouble getting out of bed. I'm so nervous or worried. I'm having all these panic attacks that my parents have to deal with. I'm calling and asking to get taken out of school all the time, and they're not happy with me about those things. Wouldn't their life be better off if I weren't around? And so the emphasis of, hey, look how much you're cared for them ends up going the exact opposite way about how much better would my girlfriend be or my boyfriend be if they didn't have to deal with me too. Another sign or things that a suicidal student might say is they feel like they are trapped. They feel like they have an unbearable pain. Now, that could be physical pain, like I talked about earlier, or it could be emotional pain. That could be from a recent breakup or a parent's divorce or things not going well in their lives. And they just feel like everything hurts all the time. I can't do anything right. And so it doesn't have to be like a physical pain or a chronic illness. It could be from them, mental and emotional pain. And if student says they feel like they have no reason to live, obviously a big warning sign. Also, if they directly say that they're thinking about killing themselves. Again, that last one seems like an obvious one, right? If they're saying they want to kill themselves, that's probably true. But not everyone takes it that way. There's lots of times where statements like that will get ignored because they feel like the kid's being dramatic or they just want attention or something like that. Like I said earlier, 76% of students who attempted suicide said they were going to before they did. Statements you might hear from those students are things like, there's no point in going on anymore. I can't take it anymore. I have nothing to live for. I can't stop the pain. Also statements like, I can't live without my mom. I can't live without my dad. I can't live without my boyfriend. Any of those like things like that were like, now that their lives are changed, potentially from their point of view, permanently, and things are never going to be okay again. It's just the idea that like someone I depended on or something that was good in my life, someone or something that was providing something good for me is now gone. I can't just keep going. There's no way for me to do that. If a student says things like, my life just keeps getting worse and worse and worse, and it's going to go on that way forever, big warning sign. Or if they just say things like, listen, I might as well just kill myself. Now, I want to acknowledge there's lots of times where students will say, especially in like messages or even like just to each other, like, oh my gosh, I want to shoot myself because this happened. Yeah, I'm going to recognize that those kind of statements are like, kill me now, get thrown around a lot. It has a different tone and it has a different texture to it, if you will, when they're saying things like, listen, my life's just getting worse and worse. I might as well just kill myself. Versus they're like, oh my gosh, I failed my geometry test. Shoot me now. There's no sarcasm when it's like a serious statement. And also when you're going to take statements like that and then put it up against some of those other signs that I've discussed before, like the school performance, school refusal, social isolation, things like that. We're going to put all those things together and then give it some context of how serious a statement like "I want to kill myself" can be. Um, Also signs, if they're going to be acting recklessly. Lots of times that'll show up in like if a student is old enough, driving accidents. Also things like a real sign of like suicidality and depression is they just like they can be more clumsy. Things fall more. They'll be more forgetful about things. It's all because they don't care anymore, and so they stop paying attention to things because it doesn't. Nothing matters anymore. If potentially they've made up in their head that they're going to attempt, or that idea is getting more and more serious to them. Like, it doesn't matter if I grab my school computer on the way to school. Like, who cares? Nothing matters now anyway. Or if they forget their folder, or if they forgot to do their homework or forgot there was a test that day, we're going to see a lot more of those. Also, just again, like I spoke before, the more of the irritability, or more of like, or defiance. Because also, if I'm going to kill myself, what do I care if I'm kind to you right now? What's my incentive for trying to control myself? Who cares? I'm going to be dead in a little while anyway. Um, Again, we're going to be looking for students that are sleepy in class, and aren't paying attention. And they used to be someone who did pay attention, and someone who used to be awake in class. Also, when a student is saying statements about like saying goodbye, or thank you for everything, or like I love you, but I just can't keep going like this. Lots of students, as they're preparing for a suicidal act or a suicidal attempt, they're going to say goodbye, and sometimes that's through social media, which as a teacher or administrator you may not know. Or they may be making statements on their way out of class to you, maybe saying things that are pretty out of character for them, as a way of like of saying their final goodbyes. Also, if they start giving things away that they would consider like prized possessions to them, or things that are important to them, they may say it's for different reasons, and they're just giving away their favorite hoodie, or they're giving away some of the other things that used to matter to them. That's also a very typical sign that a student is considering suicidal. Um, I Here's what, as a teacher or a school administrator, that you can do if you're noticing some of these signs. First off, it's okay to say something to them. It's okay to say that you're worried to them, or that you've noticed changes and you're worried about how things are going. And this isn't the tone of this conversation isn't, why aren't you turning your assignments anymore, or like you're going to fail, that, right? This is going to be, hey, I'm pretty worried about you. I noticed that you've stopped turning in assignments. You're asleep in my class a lot. You're talking back more. I'm just worried that there's something going on for you that you're having a tough time talking about. It's also it's okay to directly act, like to say things like, or to ask about, I'm I'm getting some signs and I'm worried about you're thinking about hurting yourself. Sometimes people will worry that, like, oh, if I say it out loud, I'm gonna put that idea in their head. Nobody works that way. If you would say to somebody who isn't suicidal, like, hey, I'm worried that you're going to attempt suicide, no one's going to go, you know what, I wasn't thinking about that before, but now I am. But if a student is thinking about it and you bring it up directly, that might create an open door where they're going to talk about it. Sometimes they also just want someone to check in on them and see if they're doing okay. That could be you. Also, in a student who's showing some of those signs of depression or anxiety, and then therefore potential suicidality, it's going to be really important that as you're having these conversations, or you're getting some of the defiance or pushback, to allow yourself to remain like really calm. Also, for those students, praise and recognition of accomplishments is going to be a really big deal. Now, I know means you have to go out of your way a little bit, which isn't always easy. But if they haven't been turning in their homework and then they do, make sure to go out of your way and just say, like, hey, can I talk to you real fast? Great job turning in your homework. Or, hey, I can tell you really studied for that test. Or, hey, you're showing up. You've been in class every day this week. I appreciate you showing up. My class is better when you're part of it. Things like that can absolutely help build self-esteem, and make the student feel like maybe there is a chance, maybe there is a reason to live. Also, for students that are struggling with anxiety or are struggling with depression, modify expectations. If they are open with you, or you do know something is going on for them, or they have an IEP or a 504 for an anxiety disorder or depression, something like that, um, they may be trying really, really hard, and the best they can do is a D, and that's okay. They should be praised for that. They should be rewarded for that. For a student with depression, getting out of bed every day is really, really hard, let alone getting to school, let alone taking a test. And so if that's what they're doing, even if they used to be a straight A student and they're not anymore, the fact that they're making any effort is praiseworthy. Um, Also, if you're noticing that they're struggling and you're not sure what it's about, and potentially you've tried to talk to them, and maybe you are talking to them, or you can tell that someone is really struggling with anxiety or depression, obviously that's time to refer to the mental health professional in your school. And so might the student be mad at you for making them go talk to the school counselor? Yes. Might it also be the thing that saves them or helps them to like turn their school year around? Yes, it could be that too. It's worth the risk. Um, Also, if a student does talk to you about like what's going on for them, if even if it's like suicidal thoughts, or that they're really struggling with anxiety, what you don't want to do is don't want to say things like, "Oh, it's just a phase. You'll get over it," or like, "Yeah, it's tough right now. It's a hard time of the year, but you'll get through it." It just becomes so dismissive, and you may not mean it to be, and you may know that like, yeah, there's a lot of kids going through that right now, which might be true, but if it comes across dismissive to the kid, if they're really struggling, what it might mean is they're going to take it as like, oh yeah, my thoughts and feelings don't matter, and I can't say those things to anybody. Um, you also don't want to say to somebody like, oh, you'll just snap out of it, or like it'll just turn around any day now. Also, if someone's talking about like you're just trying to get attention, or this is just like attention seeking, you need to knock it off. Uh, it's probably not attention seeking. They're probably actually really struggling. Um, Also, you don't want to say things like, well, like think about how everyone would react around you if you continue to go like this, or think about like what your parents are going to think or feel if you like continue to be depressed like this. Again, if someone has depression or like high level anxiety and they're starting to have suicidal thoughts, that idea of like think about how you're like think about what you're putting your parents through, that's potentially reinforcing to them like, oh yeah, you're right, everyone's life would be better off if I weren't around. um, Also, some easy things you can do is communication with parents. Let them know that again, it's an extra step, and I realize that, but let them know that, hey, I just see that your kid's struggling now in ways they weren't struggling before. Not sure if you're noticing that at home too, but here's the things I'm seeing from your kid in my class or throughout the school day. um, Also, just being around and having that open relationship with a student is going to really help, because you might be the safe person that they can talk to. Um, Also, and this can potentially be tricky, if you're noticing a kid is struggling, what that might mean to other students in the classroom is like there's a little bit of blood in the water and they're sharks. And so if a kid is struggling, lots of times they're going to become a target for bullying, and they're going to have a tough time speaking up for themselves. It's okay to encourage a student to speak to the counselor, to speak to a school administrator, or to let them know that you notice and something has to happen. Also, you can talk to a school administrator yourself or the counselor yourself about what's going on if you start to notice that a student is getting picked on more because they're struggling with mental illness. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you found this information helpful. Thank you.